Welcome back to the next episode. I am so tired. I'm sorry.
Hey,
No, it's
everybody.
not our usual fun stuff, man.
Hey, everybody, it's Murph and my tired-ass friend Morgan.
It has been. I'm sorry, guys. Welcome back to Game of Crimes, another exciting episode. But first, we just a little digression. First, Murph and I were just comparing travel stories,
Oh,
and in the last basically 8 days, I have been in Dayton, Ohio, Orlando, Florida, Denver, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, and Las Vegas. In 4 days, 24 meetings.
jeez.
Salt Lake Airport is the longest damn airport because I had to fly Southwest as the connections between Denver to Salt Lake to Vegas. I'm on United going out and back. Dude, I'm telling you, that's like,
If you're on
Romans,
United, you're going to walk like 2 miles.
yes.
It feels like it anyway.
Oh, and anyway, so we were just whining. But I got to tell you one thing. Sir, it's like these are long days. These are like 18-hour days, but I'm cramming a lot of work into it because I want to do that so I have time to do other things. And Murph, I get to Vegas. I'm staying at the Westin on Flamingo, East Flamingo Road, I think. And it's down at, by the Action. It's right there on the Strip.
Yep.
And of course, some of the things Vegas is known for is gambling and companionship, let's say.
Mm-hmm. That's
So
a nice way of putting it.
Yeah, so I've checked into the Westin. I've got checked baggage, but I'm carrying my baggage with me. I am tired, and I go to the elevator, and the elevator doors opens, and there's this lady coming out, looks fairly nice, fairly attractive, and she starts to look at me and smile, and I said, "Don't even." I just got on the elevator, and I was so tired. I said, "I don't even want to talk." I went to my room. It's like I had a couple free drink tickets, for the bar, and I looked at that. I said, "No, I can't even do that, man." I was got there, because I'm anal retentive. I had to press everything. I've got to have my jacket and everything ready for tomorrow. Yeah. My shirt, so I get the iron out, press everything because I got a 6:30 meeting the next morning.
Well, you're like me, and I think Javier's the same way. I can iron better than I can pack.
That's right. That's what irons are for. The first even as much as you train.
No, I was going to say the first question you ask at a hotel when you check in is there iron and ironing board in the room?
That's right. That's right. Sorry, guys. We just thought we'd regale you. By the way, you had fun travel, right? Like your crippled ass was you missed a flight because they landed you had 1 minute to get to the next gate.
Oh, going to Toronto this week or this past week, flew from Orlando to Dulles, but the flight was late leaving Orlando due to, they said a fuel gauge wasn't working. Landed in Dulles 1 minute after my connection flight took off. But the flight that got me booked on, I had to go through Newark then. Had to get off and hustle my old broken, crippled butt to a gate to get there. There was 3 of us on the plane, and everybody had already boarded the flight. The door's open, but there's no attendant at the desk, and it's like, well, crap. And there happened to be a steward there that was not on that flight. I guess he was deadheading someplace. And he was flying standby. And I said, "Is anybody working here?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Where are they?" And they said, "Well, they're waiting on the people from the Orlando flight to get here." I said, "That's us." So finally, the desk attendant just comes slowly back up the walkway like, "Oh, you guys are here, huh? Well, yeah, we've been here like 15 minutes. Where the hell you been?" But anyway, made it up to, finally got to Toronto about midnight. It could have been a lot worse. I might not have got there at all. But I tell you what, man, met and hung out with the Peel Regional Police up there in Ontario. Super, super dudes. We're going to get some guests on from them for future episodes here of Game of Crimes. So they got some great stories.
Yeah, and I had to deprogram Murph for 15 minutes before we got on because he kept going, A. We got some guys from Canada, A. Can't spell Canada without A.
I told him up there in the meeting, I said, "We don't say A where I come from."
We say y'all. Anyway,
fantastic people, though.
Yeah. So sorry for that divergence, but it was just one of those weeks. I mean, it was just...
It was.
It was. I have, for United for 1K, it's like, it used to be like flying 100,000 miles, but it's a combination of flight segments and stuff. So you have to get 54 segments and then 18,000, what they call premier qualifying miles, PQS. I am already at 25 segments and 8,000. I am almost halfway to 1K, and it's not even 3 months into the year.
Yep. That's good. Good stuff.
Anyway, but hey, sorry for that divergence. We don't normally whine like this. I mean, we do, but not right at the front. We work our way into it. So,
but I just couldn't. I can't pass up an opportunity to talk about my tired ass friend here.
All right. So, anyways, guys, hey, back to our regular housekeeping because that's what it says in the script. It said small talk. We went a little long on small talk, but what the hell? Give us that Apple review, Spotify, 5 stars. Head on over to GameOfCrimesPodcast.com for all things book related. There will be a book. A unique exception we're making for this episode we'll tell you about. So head on over there, follow us on that thing, social media, at Game of Crimes on Twitter, Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook, and the Instagram. Also, head on over to Game of Crimes Fans, the fan page run by our favorite Mafia queen, Sandy Salvato. Woohoo. Answer a couple questions if you're deemed worthy. Just even get close, guys. Get into the inner sanctum to see what stuff is going on. But I'm telling you, where you got to be is Patreon. Patreon.com/Game of Crimes. And Murph, we got a couple good, I should say more than a couple good. We got quite a few comments on our case of the month. We did a kind of a 2-stage one. We did it on the Murdaugh case. So we just got into the facts. And do you remember what we did the second one on?
Was kidnappings in Mexico?
Yeah. See, I'm glad you've remembered because I just forgot.
Oh, I thought it was a test here.
It was a test. It was a test. No, yeah, yeah. The kidnappings in Mexico. So no, but Katie out there, Katie, thank you for your comments. She said, hey, look, we didn't get into the drama, just the facts. Very interesting stuff about the use of technology, about how it's tracking your iPhone, whether it's in portrait or landscape mode, locked or unlocked, how many steps you're taking. All of these things now are it's getting tougher and tougher to get away with some of these crimes now with the advent of technology. But look, we got some good stuff coming up too, Q&A. We've got some folks teed up for that. Terry Burrows, Rapid Fire, Rick Jacobson getting their questions in early, and Fred Nicolosi getting their questions in early for next month. So if you want to hear what we have to say and what we think, not that you do, but if you do, you're going to find it over at patreon.com/Game of Crimes with all our other good stuff. Right, Murph?
There you go. Yep, absolutely. We're going to come up with, and I'll get you a list of movies. We're going to one of the movies to choose from that we'll review for this month also. And if you're wondering what that is, that's our Narcometer.
Patented Narcometer. We rate movies on accuracy, authenticity, and believability on a scale of 1 to 10 kilos. And by the way, Murph, I put it out there on the thing. Guess, speaking of unbelievable stuff, guess who I ran into out in Las Vegas?
I saw a picture.
Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah, how about that?
I introed. Everybody's like this. I said, screw this. I went over and said, Mark, I do a podcast called Game of Crimes. I told him about you. I said, but we had Ed Davis on there. And we got to talking a little bit about Ed Davis because we did the whole Boston Marathon thing. I told him we reviewed the movie Patriots Day on that. I mean, he let me have about 90 seconds of his time. So I got all that stuff in there. But we were at this place called Wally's Wine Bar over at a big, huge Hilton thing. Conrad's area, but he was such a nice guy. Yeah. Got to talk with him for a little bit, and I told him, I said, hey, Ed told me that you took him by your gym. He said, but Ed didn't want to show up at 3:00 in the morning to work out, and he got a big chuckle out of that. I said, no, he did not.
Well, he's very pro doing things for his community, especially with the opioid crisis that's going on. He supported DEA, and he participates when they have the get-togethers for the high school students, and where you might bring in a few hundred students, he can pack in like 23,000. So, I mean, hats off to Mark Wahlberg for what he's doing.
And I told him too, I said, God bless him too for doing his tunnel to towers things. There's 2 things I give to regularly. Actually, 3 things. The Officer Down Memorial page, the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, and Tunnel to Towers. Those folks out there are doing the Lord's work, and we appreciate them. Yep. So, Murph.
Good job, Mark.
Good job, Marky Mark. Guess what, though?
What?
This is a show about crime.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about bad people doing bad things and bad people doing bad things to good people. We take these stories seriously, but as we've evidenced over all of these episodes, what?
We never take ourselves serious, and we're not going to.
Hell no. And I've got some fun because Salt Lake City Airport sucks when you have to walk 4.5 miles. It took us 45 minutes to get out of the airport. Guess who I'm picking on this week?
Oh, I bet it's Utah.
I'm picking on Utah. So let's talk about this. Guess what time it is?
It's time for Small Town Police Blotter.
Hey. All right. Murph. Robbery. Man and woman in Utah are accused of committing an unsuccessful crime spree that had entered a corral with one of them lamenting that the pair belonged on America's Dumbest Criminals. You might ask, why is that? Let me tell you.
Why is
Jessica Lynn Savory, what a name, and Joshua Earl Campbell's criminal adventure began with the theft of a green Ford Expedition SUV around 8 p.m. on Tuesday in the tiny town of Nephi, Utah. Population 6,443. Salute. Now, half an hour later, after a scenic 26-mile drive past the low-slung mountain ranges of south of Salt Lake City, the pair arrived at the Subway shop on Payson, Utah's Main Street, according to the police. Apparently in a hurry, Savory and Campbell opted, guess what they decided to do? They said, we're just going to rob you through the drive-thru. They pulled a handgun, demanded money. Now, this is not this. We're getting into the good part. This is a longer story, but this is a good one. The drive-thru robbery was unsuccessful, and they sped off in the stolen SUV. Now, an eagle-eyed Subway employee was able to give police a partial license plate number, and a dragnet came down across the county. Back on the road towards Nephi, where the SUV was stolen, Savory and Campbell were pulled over by a sheriff's deputy. Oh, we're getting to the good part. Swinging the green Expedition off the road and onto a farm, the pair parked the SUV and jumped out in an attempt to escape on foot. Now, Savory, the lady, was quickly apprehended, but her male accomplice, Campbell, ran towards an enclosure on the farm. He opened it and went to hide in there. When they found him and apprehended him, Murph, he was in a pile of cow manure that had been liquefied by recent precipitation.
Oh, nasty. And then you don't want to put him in the back of your cruiser.
Oh, my God. No, we're hosing your ass down, pal. After the pair were being booked, Savory told officers that she and Campbell belonged on America's Dumbest Criminals for failing to get a single dollar. Now, according to the police, she definitely didn't think this was their finest hour. She would qualify for that dubious honor. And the reason I throw it in there, because one of the episodes on America's Dumbest Criminals was filmed in Utah. They knew about that, so that's why they were saying that.
You pull up, you're so damn sorry you can't even get out and go inside to rob. You just pull it to, convenient. It is convenient, you don't have to get out of your car, but good Lord. That might be, and we might have to include that on our next Patreon channel. If you can't make this shit up.
Shit up. Literally. Dive into shit. You can't make this shit up. Steve.
Yes.
Second story. I'm only going to do two stories because I've got some funny Utah laws. So
right.
This is about neighborly advice, right? Mm-hmm. So, Steve, during your time, I don't know when you were working, how many people knew you were DEA, when you were back, but it was easy when I was a trooper and stuff. You'd see the marked car. I had neighbors come over a couple times. Well, in Utah, Salt Lake City, a 37-year-old man was rearrested after he showed up at a Utah State Trooper's home to complain about his arrest for drunk driving. The only problem was he had a beer in his hand when he showed up and he was drunk.
That's what's called a rocket scientist there.
So police said the neighbor had called 911 last year to say he suspected Bell of driving while intoxicated, which he did. When Bell showed up at the trooper's home, the family called the officer who was on duty and he rushed home. Bell tried to walk away when the trooper told him police were on the way. The trooper ended up taking Bell into custody himself until city police arrived. He gets dumbass. It goes with our previous one about the guy wearing the shirt, on a Patreon episode, wearing the shirt that said dumbass as he got arrested. Yes.
Yep. And that weather just really keeps the peace and tranquility in the neighborhood, doesn't it? What a moron.
What a moron.
You act like that, you deserve to go to jail.
Well, just so that you know, speaking of manure, the city of Logan has an ordinance against throwing manure.
Wow, that's a good one.
Yep. It is unlawful for any person to throw, cast, or put into, drop, and leave in any street or public place within the city limits of the city any stones, gravel, dirt, manure, or garbage, or allow the same to intentionally or carelessly drop off or be thrown from any truck. So if you can't throw rocks, so if you had a rock, encased, poop-encased rock, it'd be doubly illegal.
I think you'll be in trouble.
No. Elephant. By the way, Steve, do you know elephant hunting is strictly illegal in Utah?
Well, I'm kind of guessing that's not a problem there, but hey, what do I know?
I'm sorry, when's the last time somebody saw an elephant in Utah?
I don't know. I tell you what, man. And here's the funny thing. All the laws come from stupid things that people have done. So there must have been at least one elephant in Utah at some point.
The reason there is a warning sign on gas, propane, barbecues, and other stuff like do not stick your head over it while lighting it is because some idiot did that. There was a lawsuit about it. Now the lawyers get involved to protect people from themselves.
Yeah. CYA.
Well, Steve, I think times have changed in Salt Lake too, or in Utah. Salt Lake City. City Code 8.12.200 states you can't allow your cattle, horses, mules, sheep, goats, or swine to run at large or be herded, picketed, or staked out on any street, sidewalk, or other public place within the city limits. So no sheep herding, no goat herding, no horse herding. Can't do any of that anymore.
Thank goodness, because it's already hard enough to find a parking place.
You can't drive on the sidewalk. Yeah, that one's kind of thing. You cannot. By the way, Steve, Salt Lake City Code prohibits playing or betting in any game of dice, slots, wheels, or other device for candy. You can't bet for candy.
You can do it for money, but just not candy.
Just can't do it for candy. Yes, and a person operating a bicycle or moped shall keep at least one hand on the handlebars at all time. Yeah, that's kind of, you kind of want to do that, but also you can't use a bicycle or moped if you're carrying a package, if it prevents you from having both hands in the control and operation of the bicycle and moped, so no clowning around out there, people.
Hey, when we were young, that was the thing. You could ride with no hands. That made you cool.
Well, here's the last one, then we'll get into our other stuff. But, as you know, with Salt Lake City, a lot of good people out there, but they have different laws about beer and stuff. So a retail licensee may not sell, offer for sale, or furnish beer in a size of container that exceeds 2 liters. Can't buy, you'd be okay with a growler, which is 1.8 liters. Or 32 ounces, just under a liter, or even a beer bomber, 22 ounces. But you cannot buy a pony keg, a full-size keg, or even a sixth of a barrel. Can't buy anything.
Why?
It's Utah.
What do the bars do? They just have a bunch of little bitty bottles?
Little bitty bottles. Can't take them out there, yeah.
You'd be lost out there, wouldn't you?
Dude, I'm telling you. Not moving out there. Okay, folks. Moving along. That brings it in to the end of that. So, hey, we just want to hop into our episode here, though, because there's a couple reasons. This, I think, we went just a little long on this intro, so we're going to make this pretty short. But I think this episode came to us courtesy of my good buddy, Rick Zach at Microsoft. You met him down at ICP, a guy named Vince Pankoke, or the German pronunciation, Vince Pankoke. He did a very interesting presentation at ICP. And we worked it out to where we'd come on, but he investigated one of the great mysteries. And I played this in high school, the Diary of Anne Frank. A lot of people have. He was the investigator on this. They did it after he retired from the FBI, and they wanted to get to the bottom of this. What happened? And there's a great book that's out there. I thought he should have got credit for it. So this is the unique one. We're going to feature this book. Even though he's not on as a co-author, it was his work that facilitated this, but it's called The Betrayal of Anne Frank, a cold case investigation, one of the coldest cases we've ever talked about. And I love the title. It's the part of the title. It says, "Less a mystery unsolved than a secret well kept."
Yeah. Yeah. Vince was, you talk about, I like to say, with Javier and I's little speaking business, that simply because we retired doesn't mean our oath ever expired. And here's a perfect example of that, where Vince is challenged after retirement from the FBI. I think 27 years.
Yeah.
And used all the skills that he had earned and learned while he was an FBI agent to find not a definitive answer now. And you'll hear him say that, but brought
I think we've come as close as we've ever come to figuring it out. Yeah,
exactly. So this is a little bit different. It's his investigative skills are fantastic. So I think you guys are really going to like this one.
And he knows some of our prior guests like Jack Garcia and Joe Pistone. So what is all in the family. So Murph, but before we can talk about it, I got to ask you one question.
Yeah.
Are you ready to play? And this is a tired question too. That's why it's taken us so long to get here. Are you ready to play the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes?
Absolutely. Everybody get in, sit down, shut up, and hold on. Let's hear what happened, what really happened to the Anne Frank and her family.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is going to be, again, another exciting. This is a unique episode.
It is.
We have done cold cases before, but I would venture to say this is probably one of the most globally recognized cold cases there is. And I like what you said on the website. We're going to talk to Vince here in just a second. It's less a mystery unsolved than a secret well kept. And what is the secret that has been held since 40s, the during World War II. And what we're talking about is the betrayal of Anne Frank. And we're bringing on somebody who might know a little bit about that because he did the investigation on the case, Vince Pankoke, unless it's the German pronunciation, Vince Pankoke.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Glad to have you here.
Or as they say, Guten Morgen in German.
Guten Morgen, also in Dutch, too.
And Dutch, too, and in Swedish, it's Gut Morgon.
Yes.
All right. Can we get back to Vince's story here?
Well, that means you're a good moron.
Yeah. I didn't want to say that.
Yeah. Vince, it is an honor to have you on here. And for our listeners, Vince is a retired FBI agent.
But we promise not to hold that against him.
We always recognize our FBI brothers and sisters. We might give them a hard time everywhere, but it's all tongue-in-cheek, and we don't take ourselves too serious here. So welcome to the Game of Crimes, brother.
Thank you for saying retired, because I get so many people that say former FBI agent, and I go, oh, wait a minute. The term former in law enforcement lingo generally means you either quit or got fired.
Good point.
If you're a retired agent, whether it be FBI, DEA, or any of the other services, it meant you completed the marathon.
There you go.
Well, unless you go back to our episode with Kevin Black that we just did, Murph, I think he was former like 3 times before he finally found himself with that sheriff.
Yeah, he's got, I don't want to say a checkered past, but he's got an interesting past.
Yeah. He had a sheriff, anyway, very famous sheriff. But anyway, let's get back to talking about you, Vince. So as we do with everybody, it's kind of like organized crime, Cosa Nostra, thing of ours. You got started in a little town in Pennsylvania. In fact, I think it was called, it's a site of maybe a famous flood.
Yeah, Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Actually, the site of 3 famous floods. Of course, the 1889 flood that everybody knows about, what was described as probably the worst natural disaster in U.S. history. But then also one in 1936, and I lived through the one in 1977. But Johnstown, former steel industry town, was the home of a Bethlehem steel plant and also a U.S. steel plant. It's had to transform itself now, since a lot of the steel production has gone elsewhere and offshore. Also, a lot of people know Johnstown from Flight 93, where it went down. The closest bigger town to that field in Somerset County is Johnstown. So it was considered sort of a base of operations during the whole effort to conduct the evidence recovery.
You guys were also the home of the National Intelligence Center there for a period of time.
NDIC.
We were, and in fact, I can remember I had transferred into Miami probably about 1992, and about 1993 or 4, the FBI position opened up there. And I had been working on a Colombian drug squad. I could have checked all the boxes that they were looking for. And so I called my wife. I had 2 small children at that time, and said, hey, the Johnstown NDIC office position open. What should I do? She paused a moment and she said, do you know where I am right now? I'm on the beach with your kids. It's February. No, I'm not going back.
And that's why we always check with the chief of domestic operations, because they're in charge.
What's interesting, if I remember right, Dennis Murtha, wasn't he the congressman? And that he was the one that kind of brought home the bacon. It was called the National Drug Intelligence Center. And so you've got Robert Byrd that got the FBI CJIS division, the Criminal Justice Information Services division, out in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Then you had NDIC, and it was less. I thought that they were bringing home the bacon as much as you had a bunch of people going, "Get me the hell away from headquarters! I don't want to be anywhere near it."
That's probably accurate. Yeah, it was Senator John Murtha, who actually was a friend of my uncle's from the Marine Reserve unit, and he was quite the politician, and whether you call it pork or whether you call it just trying to take care of your hometown constituents, he landed so many different businesses, NDIC, Also, defense contract industry is big in that area now.
I remember, yeah, he was, but I look at it this way: I think the government ought to spread the money around. I think things ought to be located in different areas, and bring that out there. But anyway, we digress. Let's get back to the Cosa Nostra thing of use. Actually, I'm interested. Let's talk a little bit about that flood for a minute, because I went through a flood in my little hometown of Chapman, Kansas. It was bad, like for 3 or 4 days. Water was like up to the doorsteps of a lot of places. There's a lot of damage, but no loss of life. But how bad was the flood in '77 there in Johnstown?
Well, and it was bad. Johnstown, for those people that don't know the geography there, the city itself is built down in a valley where there's a confluence of rivers.
Which was good for steel industry and stuff, but bad if you don't want to get flooded, right?
Well, yeah, and the old joke there was that whenever the settlers first arrived, the Native Americans indigenous to that area said, "White man, don't build near river. It floods." Well, they didn't listen very well. And 3 different times, they had major floods there. But in '77, it was an unprecedented rainstorm that put down about 13 inches in an hour, and that went on for most of the night. And so all of the waterways overflowed, but that's not what created the majority of the loss of life. There was an earthen dam that broke, and that then backed up everything else once all of that debris cluttered into the riverway. And I think there were 63 or more people that actually perished, but the loss of property and damage was just something that you can't even imagine. My dad worked on the Connemara and Black Lake Railroad, which was a short line railroad that serviced Bethlehem Steel. He said, "I knew it was bad." He was a yard master at that time, so he was up in a tower directing the different locomotives. He says, "I know it's bad when you see a locomotive that was, I forget how many tons he said it was, 80, 100 tons floating by."
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Jeez. I was thinking of that old Tennessee Ernie Ford song, "You load 16 tons." But to think of an A80 floating, to think of rail cars floating just boggles the imagination.
That's unbelievable. I had the opportunity to go to NDIC up there at one point, and I forget which office I was working out of then. But anyway, the Johnstown itself, I remember the cable car going up the side of the hill there to the nice restaurant on top, and
almost sounds like Montserrat down in Bogota.
Kind
of. It does.
Not quite as high, but it's very similar. But the thing I remember most was there were 2 really good chocolate shops in downtown Johnstown.
Of course, Hershey's, Pennsylvania's,
yeah,
around.
That was good.
Rep the home team.
Yeah, just due east of that. Yeah. Well, and the other thing, if you're a hockey fan that Johnstown's famous for, of course, it was the location for the epic movie Slapshot, starring Paul Newman, and also another sports town movie, All the Right Moves, with Tom Cruise. I actually, when I was on the police department, did a lot of contract work on that movie.
Wow.
We'll have to talk about that. So let's talk about this Cosa Nostra thing of ours. So you get past the flood. What made you decide to get into this thing of ours? I mean, were you like just running around one night watching an old episode of Mannix? Remember the old Mannix or Cannon, or Columbo, and decide, hey, I want to do that?
It's not far from that. My family, first of all, has had a history of public service, whether it was my grandfather, who was a city of Johnstown fireman. All of his sons were in World War II in either the Army Air Corps, or the Marines. I had several policemen in the family, but really that was part of the influence. But let's take a look at, you can tell from the color of my hair what time that I would have been influenced by television. And the big shows back then were, Adam 12, the FBI with Efren Zimbalist Jr. Yeah, all and including a lot of the different war pictures that were going on. So it did influence me. I can't say that it didn't. So it was one of those things. I always kind of knew what I wanted to do, and it was a bit of a natural progression.
But one question, did Miami Vice influence your decision?
That was actually a little bit post my time.
Okay.
But it did, because the funny thing, we joke about it, but one of my closest friends and partners, and also happened to attend the same high school that I did, Richland High School in Johnstown. His name is Joe Vella, and we were together on our police department. And like what happens with a lot of policemen, they want to expand their boundaries. So he started applying for major departments around the country, and ended up at Broward County Sheriff's Office, BSO, here in Broward County, which is where Fort Lauderdale's located. And that was during the time period of Miami Vice. And I think that Joe would have to admit that may have influenced him a little bit.
Hey, I'll be the first to admit it had a lot of influence on me.
Sure.
Oh, it had influence on you guys because, everybody wanted to wear it was about the lifestyle, right? It was about the hair and the cars and the.
Yeah, believe it or not, I did have hair back then.
Yeah, I don't believe it. I think
pictures.
Now, the pictures can be digitally altered. I don't believe that. Deep fake.
Brother, I had the mullet thing going back before the mullet was
now
famous.
That I believe that was I've seen your mullet. That's a crime.
That's funny.
Hey, let's hang on to that for just a second, guys, because we want to hop in and tell you about one of our sponsors. Game of Crimes is brought to you by BetterHelp. Now, Steve, you and I, we've had these discussions so many times. I can't tell you whether it's about military, law enforcement, or civilians, people that have experienced things in their lives. Everybody needs a little help sometimes. They need help changing, improving, and growing, or dealing with things from their path. When we talk with Natasha, talked about her incident, some of the help she still needs years later and probably will need into that. That's why we want to talk about this, guys, because the therapy is all about deepening your self-awareness, your understanding. Because sometimes you don't know where to start. We say it's like a toolkit. Sometimes you need some extra tools and people who have had this experience before that can tell you and walk you through some of these trips.
Absolutely. And getting therapy doesn't mean you have to go through a traumatic event. I mean, we all have different levels of understanding and wanting to know more about ourselves, what makes us think the way we think, what makes us do the things that we do, why other people act the way they act. So BetterHelp is a great place to get started here. It's all online. You just fill out a short questionnaire. They'll match you with a therapist. It's designed to work around your schedule, so it's convenient, flexible. And you know what? If you're not happy with the therapist you get, you can switch it and get a different therapist at no extra cost.
Yeah, and that's the great thing too. Is at the end of the day, what I really like about this is what works for you. It's not what works for them; it's what works for you. How do they help you out? What do you do? So the way to do this, folks, is discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/GOC today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/GOC. So, hey, let's dive back in now and let's continue on with Vince. So, but now, what'd you do after high school then to prepare yourself?
I thought about it, which department that I might want to go to. Of course, back then there was a trend, a favorable trend, that it wasn't like before where you just go from high school into a police department. Nowadays, you need a degree. So I knew that based on what my dad told me, you have no choice. You will go to college and you will get your degree because you will be the first Pankoke in the lineage to have a degree. So I attended the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown. It was a local campus. They had some criminology courses, but my first degree was in sociology, and then I went on to work on my master's in police administration at Pitt and Main campus. So I obtained my 4-year degree there in Johnstown at the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown. Had a lot of great mentors, former mayor of Johnstown, and for a period of time was over the police advisory board in the city of Johnstown. So, and I knew a lot of the policemen in Richland Township, which is, in Pennsylvania, there are townships and then there's counties, but the township was 23 square miles and where most of the businesses and airport was located for that area. So that's where I obtained my first degree.
And you probably don't know this, Vince, but I'm a West Virginia University fan, so all I can say is beat Pitt.
Yeah. Well, you know what? That's probably the PG version because
it is. It very much is.
Yeah. The other one, which sounds like Pitt, usually was the chant from the WVU or Penn State fans.
Yeah, and we are an explicit podcast. So just so our listeners can hear it, it says "Eat shit, Pitt."
I'm shocked. I'm shocked about that. So, hey,
Sorry.
shocked. Give us a real quick idea too. Give us kind of the quick, thumbnail sketch of Johnstown. How many people? What's it like? When you were there, when you got out of college and getting ready to get on the PD, what's it like?
Well, Johnstown at that time, again, it was transforming through the 70s. The 1977 flood was sort of a death nail into where the steel production was king because it destroyed so much. Up until that time, they had transitioned from like open hearth type coal or steel production to electric furnaces. It was like the latest thing. But after the flood, things went downhill. There's steel fabrication going on in Johnstown, but at that time it was probably I'm going to say between 45 and 65,000 people in the city proper, and then in the statistical metropolitan area there was probably 250,000 people.
Oh, listen to that, Mr. Masters in Public. The Metropolitan the MSA. I mean, we would just say us little farm boys just go, this is how many people in the city, this is how many people in the county.
Well, just wait. We're only partway into the podcast. You're going to hear my public school education come out somewhere along the way, along with this Western Pennsylvania accent that I haven't been able to escape, even though I've been gone since 1987.
Oh, I got one for you, Vince. What goes clippity-clop bang, clippity-clop bang, clippity-clop bang?
I don't know what.
Drive-by shooting in an Amish community.
Yeah.
Second time I've been able to use that joke on the podcast.
And again, we say, don't give up your day job, Morgan.
Yeah.
Talk about getting onto the police department.
Well, the progress there, I started to apply around to different departments before I graduated college. However, I did an internship on the Richland Police Department, which is where I was born and raised, and saw the cohesiveness. I mean, it was really a team atmosphere. It was not a large department. They had about 25 full-time men and probably 15 part-time men, which is, if you take a look at the police departments across America, most departments are small to medium-sized departments.
75%. According to FBI statistics, 75% of all police departments in the United States have 25 or fewer sworn officers.
Exactly. So I'm not trying to downplay, anything on the size of it, but we had a very progressive Chief James Mock, who really tried to bring us into the 21st century, even at that time. He was real hot on hiring college grads. He was one of the first chiefs that really stressed continuing education within the department. So I after I did my internship, I knew, okay, this is the profession I want to be in the rest of my life. I'm helping people. I get a good feeling about it. I enjoyed the camaraderie. I'm not necessarily stuck behind a desk. So it was great. Right out of college, I applied and was accepted for a position at the State College Police Department in Happy Valley up in State College, Pennsylvania.
One of the best names for a town anywhere, Happy Valley.
Isn't it? Yeah. I mean, just a great town, a great college town, a great party town.
But it's a small town, though. When you look at it, it's kind of like the way Virginia Tech is with Blacksburg. There is not a big downtown. I mean, there's stuff for the kids, right? But you would consider, thinking the size of what Penn State is, that you'd think the town would be huge, but it's not.
It isn't. No. And it still has that small town atmosphere, which I think a lot of the students really appreciate, and grow to love. And I don't know that I have experienced alumni. I'm a Pitt alumni, but it's one of those things.
Everybody has their cross to bear,
and that is mine. I can't compare the devotion to a college, anything like I've seen with Penn State grads. I have a niece, brother-in-law, and a number of other friends that are Penn State alum, and I mean, they continue to go back every year.
But they're still working on their degree, are they?
I'm going to have to use that joke whenever the next time
keep
I
coming
talk
back.
to them.
Maybe keep coming back one of these days. You'll finally graduate.
But I at the same time, I had applied for the Richland Police Department. And so I was juggling do I stay local or do I go an hour and a half northeast and go to Penn State? And because my wife had a pretty good job at a local bank at that time, she was, before IT was a thing, she was sort of the IT computer guru there. We decided to stay in Johnstown, and I accepted the position there.
Again, she made another location decision for you.
Yes, she did at that time. And it was mutual, though. I mean, my parents lived there. Her mother and some of her siblings lived there. And, we had a good life. We bought 5 acres out near the airport, built a beautiful home. Life was good for us at that time. But yet there's that little voice in the back of my head saying,
I want to go fed. I want to go fed, right?
Well, or I even considered private industry. I'm thinking.
What would you have done on the private side?
Perhaps corporate security. While I was on the police department, I did a lot of bank security training for local banks. We innovated a mock bank robbery exercise to try to teach some of the bank tellers really what to do in the event of a bank robbery. We did a lot of training on counterfeit bills, fraud. So the fraud really, really piqued my interest to the point that the last few years on the police department, I did a lot of the fraud cases, check counterfeiting, anything dealing with the fraud in our area of responsibility. So life was good. And then I ended up helping the local bureau people with a couple bank robberies. And
you mean you helped investigate them? You guys weren't pulling these off, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
See,
yeah.
Words mean things. We've had some folks on the show been a little dodgy. I had to clarify. I think you were probably pretty straight, but
yeah, please clarify if there's any doubt, because the detractors would love to hop on that.
There the FBI is. There, I knew they were in on it. Another conspiracy theory proven.
But Dale Fry was the SRA, the senior resident agent, and was a great guy. I first met Dale he was visiting our police department, and I saw him struggling out by his car. He was checking his pockets. He was checking his bag. I come out and I said, "Hey, Dale, is there something wrong?" He said, "I locked my keys in the car." I'm embarrassed to say it, but I locked my keys in the car.
And remember the cops, we all had the old door opening tools.
Yeah. Misspent childhood, I told him. So I got out the old Slim Jim, as they called it back then, and popped it within a couple seconds. We were pretty proficient since we had all the shopping centers, the mall, and the business area in our area. It was something that we did almost on a daily basis.
We had jokes about that too. We said some guys are just one paycheck away from breaking into cars and stuff because they got so good at it. They were like, they'd walk up and they'd just go cha-chink, cha-chink, then the cars started. Then they went from where you could slide, the old doorknobs that had the head on it, you could reach in with like a wire or something and get it. Then they went to the other ones. But yeah, we had one guy do it until somebody had like a fancier car and he ripped out all the wiring to the electric locks.
Oh, that's not good.
There were a lot of departments that started to experience that. And we actually came up that before we would unlock the cars, we would have them sign a release form just to say, in the event that there is some type of damage done, you can't hold us responsible.
You sneaky little bastard. You also put a consent to search form on that same thing, too.
That was in the small
That was in the fine print,
yeah.
which became large print on the back. Hey, look at this. They also signed a consent to search. We found 10 kilos. Look at that.
Look at that. Well, 10 kilos in the city of Johnstown during that time would have been something that would have dominated the news for a month.
It would have been like having a flood. It would have been a historic event. Yeah, right.
Yeah, the biggest thing we ever had happen, and since I lived near the airport, it's one of those things. You hear the planes coming and going. And you get so used to it, and it wasn't that busy of an airport. But one night, this was probably about 2 or 3 in the morning, I heard a big twin-engine plane, almost sounded like a B-24 Liberator, circling and circling and circling. And I'm wondering, what in the heck is that? Well, then my pager goes off. Go to the airport. Here, guys that were smuggling an entire transport plane of marijuana ended up, they were trying to land in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was fogged over, and they had to divert and land in Johnstown. And whenever they landed in Johnstown, they weren't familiar with the runways, and they put the nose gear off into the mud and got stuck.
Well, you know why that pilot's going, man, this is a very short runway, but boy, is it wide.
and so what happened? One of the security for the airport come out with his yellow lights on, of course, because now there's a plane blocking one of the runways, and the people in the plane jumped out and took off into the woods. And you can imagine the eyes. How big they were, like the size of saucers, they said, whenever he stuck his head up into that plane and saw what it was filled with, and saw automatic weapons laying in the cockpit area.
Wow.
So what kind of plane was it, if you remember? Was it like one of the old DC-3s or something?
It was like a DC-3 or the one after that. That's how big it was. And then,
yeah, we had... I was going to tell you real quick, too. We had one of those planes. We actually had 2 of those. One was a King Air that had like 800 pounds of weed on it. One time, DEA was following it in. We ended up intercepting it. But the one that was really weird, it was like an old DC-3. Whatever happened, it ended up landing on the highway, like 25, 30 miles north and east of where I was stationed at as a trooper. I wasn't working that day, but the guys that did. But it was an old DC-3. It was in such bad shape. They had like 55-gallon barrels of oil back there, and one guy was there. His only job was to pump oil to the engine.
Oh my God!
Because it was that's how much oil the thing was burning.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this was just the biggest thing to ever hit Johnstown, and not being familiar with the area, they ran into the woods and they were caught fairly quickly afterwards, and then there was the proverbial Fed avalanche. The DEA we didn't have anybody from DEA in Johnstown, but from Pittsburgh came in. The bureau guys were there, and then the investigation started.
That would have been a small seizure for the DEA, man. That's like a plane load.
How many pounds of weed was on the plane?
I don't remember. But if you take a look at it, I mean, they were bales, which, of course, were nicknamed Tulas, for us, because when they would kick them out, but they were bales, and it went from the back of the cockpit area all the way to the tail of the plane. So I'm going to say 30, 40 bales, which, as you even got within 20 yards of the plane,
you get a contact high.
You could smell it.
Stuff stinks, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Especially being enclosed. No wonder those guys couldn't land the plane. They were all freaking high.
Yeah. But they just didn't count on it. But that was the biggest drug intervention that we were seeing there at that time. But that's whenever I unlocked Dale Fry's car, that was the start of a long relationship that I had with him. And then the next time...
Hey, I just found an old news article about this in 1984, and it looks like there was an estimated 3 to 4 tons of weed on that plane.
Personal use.
There you go, buddy. Wow, what's going on up there in rural Pennsylvania, man? You guys smoking all that weed? Whew.
Yeah. Well,
now was it? But it was destined though. Where did you say it was supposed to land first? Pittsburgh, and it got diverted.
Yeah, it was diverted from Pittsburgh because of the Pittsburgh airport being fogged in.
So I got it wrong. This was a DC-6 carrying nearly 10 tons of weed.
Whoa. Okay, I guess that what a DEA might have been interested in that one, Steve.
Well, but you know what? I mean, nobody wants to handle it as the case agent because you got to process all that dope, and that is what a mess.
Yeah. Oh man, you take a sample, right? Take samples out of all the bales, and then haul it off and go burn it.
Wow, that's
and then watch all the people with no jobs and nothing to do, hanging out by there selling munchies, and having a good old time.
Well, and then we had the honor or dishonor of having to sit there and watch it until they could figure out, okay, whose jurisdiction is it? Where are we going to unload it? And then I was with one of the local pilots who they tasked to try to pull the thing out of the mud with the combination of a tow truck and then powering up the engines. And so I'm in the plane with him, and he's powering it up, and it's rocking and jumping. And I looked over at him. His name was Bob Augustino. He was the Crown American Corporation jet pilot. He flew a Canadian Air for them. And I said, "You are certified on this plane?" He goes, "Oh no." He goes, because I've never flown one of these in my life. But he goes, "It's all about the same."
Yeah, that's not a prerequisite.
No.
Trying to think, what movie was it? There was a fun one too, and I can't remember. They're buying a chopper or whatever, and they got this pilot. They go, "Well, how much time have you got in this chopper?" He looks down at his watch. He goes, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, needless to say, I didn't volunteer to take off with him to fly to wherever it was going to be sitting for the rest.
That was a smart decision there. You might take off's not the problem. Landing is.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah. Hey, well, let's talk about a couple more things before we talk about your Fed career, because I want to really get in and dig into Anne Frank. But you were telling us before we started, there was a couple. You worked security for a couple of famous movies that were made, and a couple actors like Paul Newman and Tom Cruise happened to be hanging around your neck of the woods.
Well, actually, yeah. When the Slapshot movie was going on, I was finishing up high school and in college. So we were able to. It was a big thing in Johnstown. Everybody wanted to go to the games and watch the filming, and that was my first introduction to really the movie magic, as they would call it. But then, while I was on the police department, the movie All the Right Moves, starring Tom Cruise, was being filmed in the greater Johnstown area, and so they based a lot of it in the city itself, but also in the neighboring municipalities. And they were staging all their trailers out of the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown parking lots for a couple of the scenes. And so I'm there in uniform, just hired as contract security through the police department. And there's a young Tom Cruise with a football, because it was a football movie, throwing it to himself, throwing the ball up in the air, catching it up in the air and catching it. So I figured, well, I don't even really know him at that point. I walk over to him and say, "Okay, I'm going along." And he hauls off, throws the ball to me, and we spent the next half hour pitching and catching the ball and just having a normal conversation.
I got one question. Did he try to convert you to Scientology, though?
I don't think he was quite
there yet, huh?
Quite there yet. Yeah, I don't think the during that time period he seemed quite normal.
That's a pretty cool story, though.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, did you get a chance to meet Paul Newman?
I did not. My wife's father, though, at the time, he had a twin brother, and they were featured in one of the scenes. I think did get to see him. And one of the policemen on the police department, his girlfriend at that time, who was a figure skater, which played into the whole theme of the movie, was hired as a supporting actress in the movie to be one of the girlfriends of the skaters of the Johnstown team at that time.
Very cool.
Look at your brush with greatness. Well, I have another brush with greatness for you. for you, and you may be unaware of this. So you got onto the Bureau. What year did you go to the Academy?
I was scheduled to go at the end of 1987. That's a story in and of itself. But I actually went in the beginning of 1988, starting the first class in 1988.
I went to the back then is when the DEA Academy was actually at the FBI Academy there. So I came on in June '87. I was reading your bio and I thought, well, we may cross paths in the hallway up there. But I graduated the Academy in September '87.
Yeah, we just missed one another then. I was scheduled to be there starting at that time period in '87, and I turned in my resignation to the police department. I'm getting my affairs all in order, getting the house sold, and all of a sudden I get a call from my recruiter, and we got a little problem. I go, what's that? We're going to need to delay your class a couple times because your package wasn't complete. They needed to do one more interview. And I said, "You're sure everything's okay? Because my resignation's in. The house is for sale."
Dude, I'm homeless. You got
yeah, I'm going to be living out of my car. But everything went through, and it worked out well. And remind me, I want to come back to tell you who my recruiter was. But the one thing about the DEA students, the recruits that were in the FBI Academy at that time, because they were combined, we always said the DEA at that time had the nicest looking female candidates. Whoever was recruiting them, they were.
Oh, come on, you had Jodie Foster going through and going to interview serial killers. She's not even out of the academy yet. What are you talking about?
Yeah, isn't that funny how that works?
It is.
But I got to tell you who my
don't even have your badge yet, really your gun, and yet you're allowed to go interview Hannibal Lecter. I hate his liver with fava beans.
Well, we always say Hollywood never lets the truth get in the way of a good story.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, speaking of a good story, you want to talk about your recruiter, so.
Yeah, so I was convinced by one of the other local agents to apply. We were working a bank robbery together. A captain of mine and I ended up catching the bank robbers as they emerged from a wooded area that they fled into, and he. I got to develop a relationship with him, and he said, "What are you doing? You're wasting your time here. Apply to the Bureau. You have your degree, and if you don't pass, fine. If you do, then you can decide whether to accept the position." Well, put me in touch with the recruiter. And I didn't know much about the Bureau at that point. I hadn't read that much about it. Her name was Joanne Misko. Let me correct that. No, that wasn't her name. Oh my God, I'm having a senior moment.
I'm with you. Unfortunately,
here's the deal: you could make up a name, and nobody outside you is going to know.
But anyway, it'll come to me. That was another great female agent they work with. But anyway,
apparently not so great. You forgot her already.
Oh my goodness, yeah. But she turned out to be the very first female FBI. There were two that went through. She was one of the first. In fact, here, let me make sure I get the name right. Yeah, well, you know what? I had it right. Look at that senior moment. I got it. I pulled it out. Joanne Pierce.
No. You want to rephrase that? You what?
I pulled it out of the back of my brain.
There you go. Okay, it is a family, not quite a family-friendly podcast, but
yeah. But there it is, Joanne Pierce Misko. I didn't know it at the time. I'm talking to her, and she's so nice, and I'm going through the testing procedure, and they tell me, well, there's going to be an oral board, and it's a couple people counseled me. It's a good idea to know a little bit about the history of the Bureau and read through some of the books. And as I'm reading through one of the books, I'm like shocked because I read that the first female FBI agent is the lady I've been talking to, who's a recruiter. Now, here's where it gets really strange. My mother-in-law is a former or ex-Catholic nun. Otherwise, I wouldn't have met my wife.
Oh, now wait a minute. According to your definition, former or ex means she got fired or kicked out.
Or one more thing, she quit.
Oh, okay. She
And
quit.
that was during a time period when you just didn't do that. But there was a whole revolt that went on at a diocese in Pittsburgh, and about 10 or 12 of them quit. But as I'm reading further about Joanne Misko, lo and behold, she was a former nun. So whenever I'm sitting down talking to her, I gave her the secret handshake and told her I read a little bit about her, told her about my mother-in-law, and well, the rest is history.
How about that? Small world.
Yeah.
It is amazing how the degrees of separation are almost non-existent anymore.
They are, and especially when it comes to law enforcement.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny you say that too. Let's talk a little bit about what you did in the FBI, because I don't want to gloss over it too much, but a lot of what we're talking here really forms the basis for you later. And the end Frank does, because it's about relationships. It's about connections. It's about you getting, as you and I talk, you getting to some of the information. I mean, you just had to, you could not have done this just on your own, parachuting into an area, having the relationships with the Dutch police. But let's talk about some of the things you worked on the Bureau. So you get out, your first post is Milwaukee.
Well, and so you know how they do it. Murph remembers it. I'm sure that the DEA did it sort of the same way, where, like 6 weeks into your training, you get your orders, you stand up in front of the entire crowd, and you say, I think I'm going to, and I probably said Miami. And I'm actually going to, and I open the envelope up and I'm trying to read it. And I go,
well, the first two letters match.
I don't even know if I can pronounce the name. The Eau Claire RA out of Milwaukee Division. And so I ended up in the northwest most resident agency, covering about the upper fourth of the state of Wisconsin. 3-man RA, more deer and bear than people.
But I tell you what, though, when I went to a little college called Fort Hays State University, we were in AIA Division I. We played Eau Claire.
Did you really?
I believe in the national tournament. Yeah. So I remember their chant was, "We are Eau Claire."
Eau Claire. Yes. Yeah. Well, and it's a great university there, part of, University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire. Great town to start in, very similar to my hometown of Johnstown. In fact, some of the neighboring communities had the same name: Altoona, Somerset, even Richland. There was
sounds the names sound like Pennsylvania, even though they're up in Wisconsin.
And it's almost like what they did is they transported a lot of the immigrants, probably, that didn't end up in Western Pennsylvania, along with Scandinavians, also ended up in Western Wisconsin.
Wow.
Yeah.
Again, like you say, it's funny because more wildlife than people in some of those areas. So when you got up there, what constituted the bulk of your work in the 3-man resident agency in Eau Claire?
Well, considering that my territory, I was about 4.5, almost 5 hours away from our division office, Milwaukee. So, I mean, you were literally on your own in your territory. And from Eau Claire, where our office was, the length of my territory was about 3.5 hours north, up into the North Country. We worked anything that was a federal violation. There was really no DEA presence up there. So we worked drugs, we worked bank robberies, a lot of white-collar fraud. There was even some foreign counterintelligence, believe it or not, because a lot of the Russian grain ships would come into the Superior Duluth port.
Oh, so what would give me an example of, as they say inside the business, FCI? So you're working FCI, foreign counterintelligence. What would be some of the things these Russian ships? And I'm going to be shocked if you say they were spying on us.
Well, let me add one more thing into the equation. Based in Western Wisconsin was the Cray Research, the supercomputer company facility. That's where Seymour Cray and the Cray supercomputers are really what at that time ran the NSA, ran all of our highest intelligence computing. Their research and development facility was there. They had since moved their headquarters to the Twin Cities area over just across the nearby border in Minnesota. But we ended up with so many Russian students and Chinese students that were just sort of lingering in the area, surprisingly, or not.
I'm shocked. I got to tell you, I'm shocked. But you were there for 4 years, though. But eventually, this is where you got to make a decision. So, how did the opportunity in Miami come up? What were you looking to do at that point?
Well, back then, a little bit different than some of the other agencies, and I think it's back to this now, that you would go to a small to medium size office. I ended up in a 3-man RA because I was a former cop.
And so that you did that right because you already had experience, your work and stuff. They figure if anybody could be on their own with no supervision but less supervision, it might be you.
It might be a former police officer.
Either that, or they didn't really like you, and that was as close as they could get to putting you there or somewhere in Alaska, right?
Do you know, the thought crossed my mind, especially when my wife went on the house hunting trip. Calls me. I'm planning on joining her over the weekend. I was going to leave from Quantico. I planned on joining her. And she said, this is a nice area out here, but I think at that time it was the beginning of March. And she said, and they're very modern here. I think they have electric cars. And I go, dear, electric cars? What are you talking about? She says, yeah, I see cars. I'm looking out the hotel window. They're plugged in. I said, well, I have news for you. They're plugged in so they don't freeze overnight. They're not modern. So at that time, you would go to a small to medium office for 3 to 5 years, and then they would rotate you to a major office, one of the top 12 or top 15. And they asked me, I really made an effort to bust my butt there and do a good job because I wanted to make sure to end up in an office of preference. And so I put down Washington, D.C., but Miami was my number one choice. And I remember the day I got the call from our SAC who said, yep, you ended up in Miami. You can now thaw out after 4 years.
So when did you end up in Miami?
I landed in Miami in May of 1992.
And Murph, when did you punch out for Bogota, for Colombia?
I headed out in June 1991, so we were just following each other both ways.
Following to the academy, following to Miami.
Yeah. Well, and then I followed him to Bogota, too, because we did a lot of work with the guys out of the DEA office in Bogota because they had such a big presence there. Because I ended up in Miami on the Colombian drug squad, which was N3 and then later D3.
So, well, you would just reminisce then with Murph. Do you remember some of the guys you worked with from DEA down there?
Yeah, Bob Versus was one of the agents. Now,
I knew Bob when he was stationed in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, he was stationed in Fort Lauderdale, and he was our primary contact down there. And we did a lot of great cases together. People say that the DEA and FBI didn't work together. That really wasn't true in Miami. I mean, there was a necessity for a lot of the squads to work together. And the squad that Murph was on, what was that in Miami?
I was in Group 10, the Caribbean group.
It was what, C10?
Group 10.
Yeah. That group worked primarily with our sister squad, which was D5. And Mike Taft, Joe Ciccarelli, a lot of those guys worked day in and day out with the ones from Group 10.
Yeah, when I transferred to Bogota, my partner at that time was Kevin Stevens, who we've had on the show. And we had an informant. Long story short, we ended up combining with one of the bureau squads. I think it was D5 because our informant. We were representing ourselves undercover as we could provide transportation of anything at any time, anywhere, boats, planes, mules, whatever you needed. And the Bureau already had an undercover business set up on the Miami River. So it just all coincided together. And then I took off to language school and then down to South America. But they went on and made a hugely successful case out of that.
Yeah, I'm totally familiar with that case. The undercover was Anibal Gonzo, as we know him, Anibal Gonzalez. And
I think you're right.
Yep. Yeah, and some of the stories that came out of that were just incredible.
Small world.
Well, here we go again. We're all. It used to be 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, then it's 3 degrees of law enforcement. If you don't know somebody, I only had a small tour down there while you guys were there. It was Plan Columbia, but during 2000. But I noticed when I was reading the bio, you talked about working with DOS, which is like their immigration folks, and I was working with the Dirección Nacional de Estupefacientes, the DNE. Gabriel Merchand, I believe, was the director of it at that time, and we just had a great time. Stayed down in the Andino Royale, Calle 85.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I got to tell you too. So funny. I may have told this story before, but you get old and stuff. One of the funniest things, I'm down there with a guy who had just punched out of the agency. He was an operations officer. And we were going to go down and work on Plan Columbia. And I'm one of those people, I just like to mess with people, just like to have a little fun. So we're in the lobby of the Andino Royale, and there's 2 guys got military haircuts. I'm going, watch this. Because we got hair. We don't look like anybody. And it's like, hey, you guys are Americans, right? Hey, how you doing? What do you guys do? So I started hey, what's your name? What do you do? Just start chatting them up. And because I'll tell you about my interview interrogation story later with the Bureau. And it's just like, hey, what do you guys? Well, we're foreign service. Oh, really? When you go back to the airport, maybe we can catch a ride with you and stuff. And they're like, get us the hell away from the guy. So him and I, we got to figure out what we're going to do. So we leave, we start walking. But what we saw, these guys ended up meeting later in the lobby. And there's always that guy, he's agency because he's got that frickin', khaki vest on, in the pants, vest.
Yep.
And name Bob, Mike, Bill,
Paul. That was
Paul.
The name down there.
Yeah.
Paul.
And then there's looks like there's some Colombians there too, like military officers. And then they all go off, and him and I are thinking, we got to go find something to eat. So we're walking around, and we find this restaurant, and we walk in, and it's kind of like empty. You can hear stuff above us, but it's like empty on the main floor. And the lady walks up, and she goes, "Oh, your party's upstairs." And we're going, "Oh, okay." So we walk upstairs, and guess who we run into? Paul and Bob from the CIA and all those other guys. He walks up and he says, "Hey, this is a private party." And I said, "Oh, really? Hey, what's your name? What do you guys do?" And we're just, that was fun.
The fun of it. I mean, as much as you try to blend in there,
you don't.
You don't. It sticks out. I mean, you're from one of the 3-letter agencies.
Yeah, and then we went up. We ate at Montserrat. So that was the power wasn't exactly reliable in Bogota. We had just made it up. The cable car got off, and the power went out. People stuck on the cable car, but all of us were up there. But fortunately, the Montserrat, they used gas to cook with, so we were good. We ate by candlelight. They cooked our meals. But what a fun time! It's the first place I actually got real Colombian coffee. I knew it was Colombian because I bought it there.
Well, that whole experience of Montserrat, did either of you ever take the opportunity? I'm sure maybe Murph, you did. On the weekend, they, especially on Sundays, they sort of have this thing where you start at the bottom, you don't take the cable car, and you hike the trail up to the top to the monastery. Have either of you done that?
Not me. No.
Well, an incredible experience.
Well, after a series of a couple technical glitches, we are back. So don't worry if it sounds a little disjointed. That's just a normal day for us.
Well, when you got Murphy on here, and everybody knows about Murphy's Law, and let me tell you, that's something I live with every day of my life.
I'm just going to have Murph literally phone it in next time. I'll just have him listen in from my side, and we'll do it. Hey, but I want to ask you before we moved on. I just realized I forgot to ask. Did you catch any Russians though in Milwaukee?
We didn't catch any Russians. However, during that time period, surprisingly, there was a Russian-based business that was based outside of Milwaukee. It was the Belarus Tractor Factory. Nobody could figure why there was this tractor factory that was Russian-owned that was there. It was some kind of economic exchange. Turned out probably all they were trying to do was steal the Briggs & Stratton and Tecumseh air-cooled engine technology. But the game was trying to figure out who the Russian intelligence officials were that actually worked in the factory.
Yeah, and trying to find, because they would have been under non-official cover. They would have been called illegals, because you got legal residents and then illegal residents, and they would have been having to operate right as an illegal, right?
Right. Yeah. They were posing as management within certain offices of the tractor factory. But the question always was, well, which one of them was the one, or more than one.
Yeah, which one? Here it is. A tractor factory produces no tractors, but yet they seem to hold lots of meetings, right?
Yeah. And the only other thing we did have a Russian student caught in one of the dumpsters, digging in a dumpster. She attended the University of Wisconsin, Madison, which is the main campus, and they caught her digging in the dumpster in Chippewa Falls, which is probably about 3 hours away. And the crazed security caught her and then released her, and because she didn't steal anything. But who knows what she was looking for. And then whenever the Madison resident agency went to try to talk to her and find her at the college, she was gone.
Of course. Yeah. Well, I tell you, but you know what? You know, and I know what they're looking for. I mean, you wouldn't believe the stuff people throw away that ends up in the trash that can give you names, passwords, phone numbers, information.
Absolutely.
My wife thinks I'm crazy because most of the stuff we get in the mail, I put in the shred box and I shred it myself. I've got a nice shredder. And she's like, why do you keep doing that? Well, have we been hacked yet? Which I probably shouldn't have said that on here because now people are going to hack me, aren't they?
they're going to do it just out of principle. Yeah. Well, I actually we had our identity stolen, as probably just about every American, through the data breaches that have gone on, either at OPM if you were a government worker, but even I think it was Experian.
Experian had that, and then LEO, the Law Enforcement Online. There was a breach, and there was just another breach lately too. Usually, third-party contractors or somebody allowing access. The only thing that ticked me off about the OPM breach, I figured the Chinese were going to have all of our information at some point anyway. But I'm the one with the clearance in the family, not my wife. Who do you think got the letter 90 days before I got my letter?
Yeah.
Just shows you the level of importance you have there, Morgan.
The poor guy that was he was a Haitian who bought the info from the dark web and filed for a credit card under my name, and knew when it was coming to the house because I hadn't signed up for postal informed delivery, which if you haven't done that, do it now. It shows you in an email every day what's coming in your mail. Well, he had signed up under my name to a false email, saw when a credit card was supposed to be coming to my house. Luckily, I already knew when it was coming, and he showed up at the mailbox and I was there. So he's now in jail.
The FBI always gets their man.
I love it. Gotta love it.
This time it worked.
Well, I do. I get the same thing too. I've got the U.S. Post Office Inform. It's even got the mobile app too. I think they changed, but it's we've got a person who delivers the mail who is challenged, and I would say it's a safe bet to say 1 out of every 5 times our mail ends up in our neighbor's mailbox or their mail ends up in ours. And it's like, how could you drive down a street, shove a bunch of mail into it, and then bypass 3 more mailboxes going, oh, apparently nobody has mail today. And then anyway.
Yeah. I think his brother or sister works down here in Orlando because it's holy cow.
They're all related. When you figure it out, they're all related. But hey, let's kind of wind back. I don't want to. We're going to get into a lot of your bureau stuff as we talk about the Anne Frank case, but like you said, you worked 10 years down in Miami. So as you were going through your bureau career, at what point did this start becoming of interest to you? In other words, was it only until you had retired and you became a retired FBI, not a former, not an ex, but a retired, right? At what point did Anne Frank start registering on your radar?
Well, like most children in America during middle school, we read The Diary of Anne Frank. Although our teacher at that time, I think it was 8th grade, it was one of the suggested readings, and we only had to read a few chapters and do a book report on it. Other than that, I mean, it wasn't in my mind. Well, World War II was always on my mind because, again, as we spoke about earlier, I grew up with so many of the different war television shows, combat, the Rat Patrol, the different movies throughout my formative years, hearing my dad and his brothers talk about their wartime, and my dad's unit in his account of liberating a small subcamp of Dachau. This would have been in probably early May of 1945. World War II and that topic has always been on my mind. I love to read about it. I love to educate myself on it. It's a very broad topic.
I'm right there with you. My dad was World War II and a Vietnam vet. Got out right before Korea. Yeah, came back in. I was born at a military base. Huge World War II buff. And then actually in high school, the senior play, I date myself too, but I graduated high school in 1978, but I was Mr. Von Damme in the Diary of Anne Frank. We actually did the play. Janice Schuler was Mrs. Von Damme, and so I remember it was different too, because we did the play, and I think the play was more historically accurate. It wasn't like today where you take a lot of liberties and you put stuff on TV, like made for TV. Like, Murph, you might have a little experience with that. What's the old standard ratio you kind of give for Narcos in terms of what's accurate, what's in the ballpark, and what's just pure BS?
Yeah. So in Narcos, you figure about a third of it is true. A third of it, those events happen, but they're not depicted correctly. And that last third is just straight out of Hollywood bullshit. But it made an exciting series,
We call it, literary liberties.
Literary license, artistic license, as the French would say, artistic license.
And it's right in your contract. There's nothing you can do about it.
So, but as you go through your bureau career, so where do you end up at? Where's your final post? Where do you retire from?
I actually retired out of Miami. When I landed there in 92, ended up on the Colombian squad, did that for 10 years. And then, lo and behold, 9/11 happens. And when 9/11 happened, we sort of got diverted a little bit because
that was all hands on deck, right? And I know this too from my work at DOJ, but 12 of the 19 hijackers, I think, had a nexus in Florida, right? Or even more?
Absolutely. 12 of them had a nexus here. And because the terrorism squad at that time didn't have the telephone exploitation skills that a Colombian drug squad did, because our bread and butter was telephone exploitation and wiretaps. That was what our squad did better than any other.
And you and Murph both love writing applications for Title IIIs, right? Title IIIs were what you guys love to do, right?
Oh, Lord.
It was our bread and butter, and Murph can tell you how hard it is to infiltrate a Colombian group with an undercover. Now, you can utilize sources, but, they got all smart and onto that. So the one way to kind of defeat them was through tapping their phones. And because at that time, dumping of phones was very common and usually try to defeat law enforcement efforts. But we became so skilled at being able to exploit everything about a phone. I tell people nowadays, give me your cell phone. I could tell you everything about you. I could tell you your friends, your enemies. I could tell where you eat, where you live, who your girlfriends are, your banking habits. Everything from your cell phone.
Yep, and you can create a pattern in life. And even if you change your number, Vince, we could probably find your new number.
Right, we would do that because your circle never really changes. And so we were so good at that after the first couple days went by and everybody was it's like that punch in a fight. That first punch, you're a little bit stunned, and I think the Bureau and all the law enforcement agencies were a little stunned at 9/11. But then, you get back into the fight, and they came down to us and said, listen, you guys are better at this than us. What can you do? So myself and about 12 other people, including Gonzo, who I mentioned Murph earlier, was the undercover on the River Rats case. He and my partner Enrique Mercadal and a bunch of the other guys that were used to this type of exploitation, we formed a squad, and we worked for about 3 months on nothing but exploiting the hijackers' phone numbers. And we found so much information. It was incredible. We tracked it back down to the Hamburg cell. We identified that.
Which that was Mohammed Atta came out of Hamburg over here, Nawaf al-Hazmi. I mean, same thing. We can go through all the, and you were talking about a little thing we were discussing this. We may have been offline at the time, but you were talking about NCIC offline. And I was talking about, and that's the thing too. When they went back and they looked at it, this is one of the things that drove my work down at the Department of Justice. But you had Nawaf al-Hazmi was stopped. Here's an example. Stopped by the Oklahoma Highway Patrol in April, written a traffic ticket. So, he was checked to see if he had warrants. So he would have had an entry in NCIC, checked his registration, driver's license. He's put on a State Department watch list in August. Why would you put somebody on a watch list who's already in the country?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, he's already here. It's defeating the purpose of it, unless he would leave and come back. And of course, that wasn't
going to stop him at that point either.
No,
except it would have him if he'd been on the watch list.
I'm watching. I'm watching Vince here on a camera, and we only post our audio, but we see each other on video, and I can see how excited you're getting. And I can imagine those guys coming down saying, "What can you guys do?" And you're looking at them going, "Hold my beer."
That was about it. And I mean, we worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, working with all of the different agencies and technical capabilities. And we had people within our own office and outside of it saying, "What does this matter? They're dead. What does this matter?" And I go, do you really hear yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
What we're thinking is that these hijackers, there may be more. This may be wave 1, there's wave 2, wave 3. I want to know who their circles are. Yes, they're dead. We can't prosecute them, but we have to determine how this happened, who assisted them. Is there going to be another incident that happens out of it?
Which was tactic of Al Qaeda and stuff. They would have the attack, and then you would have follow-on attacks, and you would have Tanzania, Kenya. We think about the embassy. Nairobi. You think about the embassy bombing. So yeah, it's for somebody to go, well, what's good is that? Oh, well, I guess we just shouldn't investigate it at all then, huh?
And I told them that. I did a month in Kenya, in Nairobi after the embassy bombing, but I was there with a SWAT unit. We were providing security for the different investigative teams that would come in. But, as my time there, we became familiar with how it happened, where it happened, how it also happened in Tanzania. And many of these agents on the Miami terrorism squad never came in contact with anything like this before. I mean, it just wasn't something that they experienced.
And if you think about it, if you're the people that we know about are the suicide bombers, those are the identities. If they're willing to let you sacrifice your life, you're expendable. You're not the brains of the operation. For somebody to ask you, "Oh, they're all dead," well, that's very short-sighted thinking on their part.
Oh, it is. And the amount of information that we developed out of the cell phones it was just amazing, people.
Well, let me ask you a question. Answer to the extent that you feel comfortable answering. But
that sounds like a loaded question.
It's kind of like well, look, it was like when we talked to Ed Davis. Ed Davis is a friend of mine. He was the commissioner of the Boston Police. We talked about the Boston Marathon bombings, and he said there are still people that need to be held to account, basically, in Boston. There's other people. Do you feel comfortable, even after the 9/11 Commission report, do you feel like we've discovered everything we could have, or was there still stuff out of 9/11 that we should still be concerned about here in the U.S.?
I think we would be naive to think that there isn't something else out there. I mean, there were a lot of leads there were so many leads that were, because of the volume, were going ignored. You had two different things. We had the investigation of the people responsible and anybody that they came in contact with. And then probably on a much greater level, you had all of the phone calls coming in to the Bureau office. I think my neighbor might be Muslim. And so I'm worried about that. Just crazy calls that were coming in that were unrelated, but you couldn't ignore them. You had to do a triage, so they developed a sort of a triage type protocol to go through these different things. And the phones rang nonstop. I walked by that phone center. I couldn't believe the tips that were coming in. Bravo to the public for actually jumping in and be willing to help law enforcement. But I have to say that 99% of it was just white noise. You had to filter through it to find out anything that was of substance. But the one story you guys might sort of get a kick out of is that we saw an increased flurry of activity on all of the cell phones just prior to the 4th of July holiday, leading up to the 4th of July holiday. And it was really interesting. So what we would do is we would develop leads and we would send teams of agents out to find out who these people were that these phone numbers belong to, interview them, find out if they remember the hijackers, take photo spreads. What was their contact? Do you know that flurry was mostly escort services here in South Florida? Which you know,
the one last hurrah before our jihad, we're going to go out. And that's, they saw that with the folks, because I drove past 3 of them motherfuckers that morning, and I'll say it because I was headed into the Reagan building that morning. So I passed those assholes going out to Dulles Airport.
Wow.
On the toll road, and we were in the Reagan building. We had meetings in the Pentagon. Fortunately, we were in the Reagan building to begin with first. I remember walking across the Roslyn Bridge, going into Roslyn, watching the smoke come up out of the Pentagon. And it's like, yeah, to your point, it's like, and guess what they were doing? Strip clubs, out having their one last hurrah.
Well, they're trying to get an advanced start on their 72 virgins.
Right. Yeah.
You will find no virgins at the strip club, my friends. I've heard.
Allegedly. The one interview was interesting because it was an escort who only cooperated if her name wouldn't come into it. And you know how that goes. Of course, you're going to tell them, we need the information. Tell us. And she said, my husband doesn't know what I do. I just do this for spending money. But I will tell you that I visited with this hijacker on several occasions. And we were intimate. And on the last occasion, he told me, this is the last time I'll ever see you again. And she said, well, you're leaving? You're leaving South Florida? And he goes, yeah, something like that. So we, once we were done with our phone project, which was pretty much at the beginning of 2002, we handed everything off to our New York office. And later, we had different messages come through where somebody in the intel community, based on a lot of the interviews that we sent up and the telephone analysis, thought instead of it being 9/11, it was probably going to be 7/4. And I just found that very interesting. I don't have any evidence to prove that.
Well, here's an interesting historical analogy, because you have to, dates are very significant to Al Qaeda. Dates are very significant to Islamic terrorists. There are things that mean something to them. The Madrid bombings, and so historically, when you go back and look at it, September 11th, 1683, I believe, was the last incursion of the Ottoman Empire into Europe, and they were stopped at the gates of Austria, with Germanic forces and Polish forces, and that was September 11th, 1683.
I did hear that. Yeah. So you wonder, was that really the date, or was it just more of an organic thing that this is when everything was in place and it worked out?
Well, and that's the thing, is obviously they're dead. You got Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, but he's he's in a hole in Gitmo, and we don't know whenever he's going to be tried, because he was one of the masterminds of this too. But yeah, everything's significant, right? To hit people on a significant date like September 4th, or and then maybe that was the alternative. The fallback was 9/11. Again, not a conspiracy theory, but it goes back to one of the things: you have to understand your adversary, understand their doctrine. It doesn't matter what you think; it only matters what your adversary thinks.
Yes, exactly. But that ended up being the transition then from all of the Colombian squads being told, listen, the handwriting's on the wall. They're going to be converted to terrorism squads. Are you interested in becoming the supervisor of D3, which is going to be a terrorism squad? Terrorism really wasn't my thing. So I said, no, I think I'll look elsewhere. And they said, well, we do have a project that we you might want to think about, though. It's called the Gitmo Project, that you would be the bureau representative at Gitmo.
Oh, geez.
To Club Gitmo.
To Club Gitmo. I thought about that for a hot second and said, no, I don't think so. I've been to Gitmo on flights, extradition flights out of Colombia. We'd stop at Gitmo and then come into Fort Lauderdale. But
very wise choice.
I opted for a spot. One of my squad mates, longtime friend Martin Suarez, was out running the undercover group. It was called Stagehand, It was a backstopping undercover group. There's several of them around the country that the Bureau relies on for undercover operations. And I ended up with another one of my squad mates jumping out the stagehand, and I was pretty much in the undercover group then from 2002 almost until the year that I retired, which was at the mandatory age of 57 in November of 2014.
So what kind of UC work were you doing?
Well, I ended up
were you going undercover as an Amish farmer importing cocaine because you had the Western Pennsylvania accent? Did you have to grow the beard, Jedediah? And
I had that experience and probably could have pulled it off. But
you did go UC as an Amish farmer?
No, but what I ended up doing was what I do good, and that's playing a dumb investor very well. Because my track record of investments isn't that good. Oftentimes, I would play a very rich investor in some of these fraud schemes, teamed up with most times who's probably one of the best bureau undercovers in stock fraud cases, Joe Yastrzemski. He's a legend. Was a Series 7 license holder, stockbroker during the heyday in New York on Wall Street, and then got recruited to come into the Bureau. And so he and I and a number of the other undercovers teamed up, and we were a team, and we just had so much fun at it. In fact, the bad boy of Wall Street, Ross Mandel, who ran Sky Capital, they tried targeting him for years. SEC, different agencies, never could get him. And finally, Joe and I went into it and targeted him. We ended up flipping one of his floor managers who ran the trading floor, a guy by the name of Phil Akel. And then he cooperated, and Ross Mandel finally went down. Even though it occurred after the movie Wall Street was out, it almost, if you see the real life Sky Capital and Ross Mandel, that was Gordon Gekko.
Yeah. Hey, did you? So guess who we had on our podcast before? Jack Garcia.
Big Jack and I have worked at a number of cases together. We're very close friends.
And also Joe Pistone.
And of course, Joe was in the undercover unit that I was in and had just left and retired. And so that was one of the spots that I ended up coming in and filling.
You took Joe Pistone's place?
Oh, wow. No one can ever.
No one could take his place, fill his shoes, but you took his slot, right?
Yeah, one of the slots that was open during that time period, yeah. Now, the funny thing about the whole story of Joe Pistone, okay, of course, a lot of people say, who's Joe Pistone? And you got to say, well, Donnie Brasco.
Donnie Brasco.
Oh, the movie, Donnie Brasco. Yes, yes. I had, even though I knew Joe, and I never worked with him in an undercover capacity, but I knew him well. One day, I get a call, and of course, nobody could. We worked out of an off-site location, just your typical office that people would drive by. Nobody knew what it was. I get a call. All calls would be routed through a cutout phone that would go through our main office. I get a call from the office operator who said, I have somebody by the name of Donnie Brasco on the line that wants to talk to you. And I said, oh, come on. Now who's screwing with me? Donnie Brasco. Yeah, right. So,
is this while the operation was still going on, or it was over at that point?
Which operation?
Donnie Brasco, you're talking about?
No, it was long after.
Okay.
After. Yeah, long after. So I get a call, and they patch it through, and he goes, hi, how you doing? This is Donnie Brasco from the Philadelphia division. And I go, yeah, all right. Because cops being cops, law enforcement, they screw with one another. I go, who is this? He goes, no, this is Donnie Brasco. And I go, yeah, I know Joe's voice. This isn't Joe. Who are you? He goes, well, I'm his nephew. And I paused a little bit. He goes, you don't know the story. And I go, no, I don't know the story. He said, back then, Joe adopted my name. I'm his nephew. My name, Donnie Brasco, is his undercover name. Because there weren't computers, there weren't ways to search it back then. Back then, all you needed was a driver's license at the most under your undercover name, and you could get around. They didn't have the publicly available databases or anything like they do now. I said, he took your name. What kind of living hell are you going through every time you call somebody and say that your name is Donnie Brasco? He says, you have no idea at the pain I feel.
And the first documented federal case of identity theft.
Did you guys hear this story? Did you know this story?
Yeah, we got it from Joe, because one of our questions always asked, where'd you get your UC name from? How'd you come up with it? Because you always want to, most people, we had Dominic Polifrone, who was the ATF agent who brought down Richard Kuklinski. Well, he used the name Dominic, as his first name, because you don't want to. But Joe did Donnie Brasco, so it was like, oh, that's
yeah. Well, and the beautiful thing about it is Donnie actually went on to become a certified undercover agent.
Oh, cool.
Of course, couldn't.
So
use
what does Donnie
name.
Brasco use for an undercover name? Joe Pistone.
Yeah, that's we kidded with him. We said that's what you ought to do. but no, of course he didn't. So, so I worked all those years, a number of different kind of cases. We also did a lot of the backstopping, which, helped undercovers create their legends.
Well, and that had to change from, like you say, from when they would hand out driver's license and passports like candy. You could get that to where now you've got social media and you've got LexisNexis, you've got internet search, you got private detectives and investigators who have almost as much access as cops do to records.
Well, and that's what I tell people all the time. You think the government has all this information. You have no idea what the public databases have that you can buy a subscription for. They actually have access to almost more information than law enforcement does in some areas. But I was lucky. I came in 2002, and that was I was on the on-ramp of the information superhighway as far as it started to go with backstopping. So I was there to be able to be talking about creating backstopping in a way that all of this could be protected. Whether if somebody ran you, we had methods that some of which I can't even discuss, but it would come back that you were a real person. Of course, as I started to get longer in my career, and about the time I retired, we were facing even greater obstacles with facial recognition. Something that, if you're dealing on an international scale, almost impossible to defeat.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Now that you're enrolling biometrics on passports, I was talking to somebody from the CIA. The agency, as we say inside the Beltway, but that has become an issue with. They're going to resorting to what they call true name now. You almost have to operate under your true name and make sure, because you now look at, you say you're doing a backstop, you cannot go fake a social media history credibly or a LinkedIn history credibly. You've seen all those ones, like they steal somebody's picture and they've only got 2 entries and the account was created 5 days ago. Yeah, okay, right. But you got some sophisticated stuff. But you're doing a lot of this. I mean, because this is going to play into what we want to talk about: the issue of identity, the issue of looking behind, knowing where to find information, looking where people are going to document things. And as we talk about Anne Frank, the Germans and the Russians were almost alike in a lot of senses. Like, there was a lot of paperwork for everything. There were documents for everything. So as you got towards the end of your career, you're 20. How many years? 27, you said?
27 with the Bureau and 8 with my Richland Police Department. So
you got 35 years in. As you start coming, your glide path starts bringing you to the end of your Bureau career. When did Anne Frank start playing a factor in what you were doing, before or after?
Well, a little bit before. In 2005, we made our first trip to the Netherlands. Our group in Miami, we did a lot of outreach and working with the various Big Five NATO partners, countries whose police departments recognized undercover operations and wanted to cooperate in joint backstopping. If we could backstop some of their undercovers from the Netherlands in the United States, it would make it that much more difficult for their criminals to investigate them, and vice versa. Even offsite locations we created in various countries, and we were dealing with Poland, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Australia. It was very similar techniques. And so we did some exchanges of undercovers with the Netherlands, with the Dutch National Police. And it was during that time I was working with a Dutch undercover in Amsterdam, and we drove past what is known as the Anne Frank house, and he pointed over to it, and he goes, "Over there is the Anne Frank house that you probably know a little bit about from the diary." And man, there was a line that was of people waiting to get in. It went almost around the entire block. And I said, "Wow, man, if we have time, I would love to go over and see that, because again, all tied into World War II. I also wanted to get down to the southern part of the Netherlands where Operation Market Garden took place, because I had an uncle on my mother's side that took part in that, landed in a glider with one of the airborne units.
One of Montgomery's attempt at glory did not go so well.
Not well at all.
And that's where you got the movies like that's where they came up with the term "a bridge too far." I think the bridge of Remagen. You've got stuff like that. It's just it was Monty's attempt to upstage, because this was after D-Day. Operation Market Garden was after D-Day, and that was supposed to be, we're going to crush Germany. And of course, Germany had other plans, and it didn't go according to our plans.
No, and that whole thing. Let's jumping forward into the whole Anne Frank story. I mean, they had illegal radios in that house, which was really an annex that was behind Otto Frank's former business. They're listening to what's happening. D-Day happens June 6th, 1945 or 1944. They're excited. Oh my God, the Americans are here. The British are here. Finally, the Canadians are here. There's going to be an effort. Then they hear what's going on in Market Garden, and they're like super excited. I mean, Otto Frank with D-Day is literally tracking on a pin map that still remains to this day there, tracking the progress of the Allies, thinking, we're finally, after more than 2 years, we're going to be able to get out of this place, and only to have their hopes dashed. But when we drove by, getting back to what brought me to it, when we drove by with the undercover, he said, I'd love to take you there, but, we don't have time. We have to get to this appointment. And I never made it back there to go through the house and experience that at that time, nor did we have time to go to the southern part of the Netherlands, which is only a few hours away. The Netherlands really isn't that big of a country. But that always remained in the back of my mind. And then after I retired, November 2014, I joked that I was on the beach, with my wife, but I was actually on the way to the beach with my wife when I get a call from the head of the Dutch undercover unit that I dealt with at that time.
And Vince, the reason you are still in Miami is because your wife made the wise decision.
Smart
we
lady.
are not going to Johnstown.
We're not going back.
Because otherwise you might have been going to a farmer's field with Jedediah to pick a hay and put up a building.
And going to the accordion festival. Yes, yeah. That's what I may have been done.
Well, that would have been fun, but it only lasts so long, right?
It does, yeah, and that's the way retirement was. I kind of helped my daughter out with her business. She was a bridal designer for a year. I did a lot of the logistics, traveling with her to bridal shows and Fashion Week in New York. And I got a call from the head of the Dutch undercover unit who said, "Hey, I have a case for you." And I said, "Yeah, but Hans Schmidt is his name. He's now since retired." I said, I'm retired. You know that. He goes, no, it's not that kind of case. It's more of a historic case, sort of a mind exercise that I know your interest in World War II. I know your father's connection. And it's what may have caused the betrayal of Anne Frank, and we say betrayal, but later we changed that. What caused the raid to happen? on August 4th of 1944 that resulted in the capture of Anne Frank, her family, and friends.
Wow, that had to come out of of all the things you could expect, right?
That came out of the restroom behind left field. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why did the Dutch police? And look, I've worked with the Dutch police before too. Great guys. I've worked with some guys named El de Jong and Roy Mente, and I got one of their books called The Undutchables. You have to understand Dutch life. Why riding a bike without a reflector is a bigger crime than walking down the street with marijuana. But why after all this time did they want to find resolution in this case? What prompted it on their side to say, hey, and then why you? No offense, but why you? Why this American that's a continent away, in 5 different time zones away at a minimum, right?
Yeah. I mean, I asked all the questions that you just asked, and maybe even a few more. Of course, it piqued my interest, but he explained to me this will not be an official project. This is not a Dutch National Police project. There is a company over here that consists of a filmmaker, a documentary maker, and a journalist who, and there were a number of historians too, who are interested in why there has never been an actual cold case investigation using cold case methodology to determine what caused the raid. And I mean, that answered part of the question, but the other thing is, well, why is it still important? At that point, it was probably the raid had happened maybe 72 years before that. Why is it still important? This was in 2016. And I had to reflect upon that for a while. And I had to talk to some Holocaust survivors. I had to enrich myself with a little bit of history on the Holocaust. I knew a little bit about it, but nothing that would ever qualify me as being an expert. And you're going to find that in so many areas that I had to dip my toe into. I knew a little bit about World War II, but I never qualified as an expert. But that's a funny thing with investigators, and you both can appreciate this. There are so many times that you jump into a case, and though you may be an expert at investigative methodology, the technology and the information and the specialties that you need to surround yourself with experts. And then based on the results, your investigative skills can tell you what is important and what isn't. And so, yeah, that was what I had to do, is jump into that area. And, frankly, I think the answer to why it was still important is to preserve the memory of those who perished, to determine what happened, because, well, anti-Semitism is on the rise again. There's a lot of hate. There is still, around the world, there are still genocide going on of whole population groups. The Uyghurs in China, different tribes in Africa. That's why one of the guys that joined our team, he worked for the World Court in the ICC, which you're probably familiar with, as a war crimes investigator. Specialty was Africa. He was an Australian cold case detective that took a leave of absence to do this term on the ICC at the World Court. So he had mountains of experience at dealing with this very topic, on why it's so important that we look back at history's past mistakes to try to learn from them and make sure that they never happen again.
And that's the whole premise of studying history, is you identify the mistakes you made with the purpose of not committing the same mistakes in the future. But man, we've gotten so far away from that, especially here in the United States, we don't care about history. We're going to make the same mistakes again. What a bunch of idiots.
Well, and we're rewriting history. We're rewriting books that were written where, we need kinder, gentler terms. No, you need to preserve it as the way it was, because you know what? I point to everybody. I said, inside China right now, the generation that is 30, 35 years old, they have no idea what Tiananmen Square is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No idea. And to this day, a lot of people don't realize over 10,000 people died during that uprising, and yet nobody in China knows about it.
And, Vince, you were describing how, they're looking at you as in a leadership role to head this investigative team, but you immediately recognized what your limitations were. And that's this, in my book, that's a sign, that's a basic tenet of a good leader, is you surround yourself with people that know the things you don't, so not only so you can learn, but they've got the expertise, and you're not behind the eight ball on this one. I love the way you described it. That was a perfect leadership tenet right there.
Well, and I always say that, I had to admit that I don't know everything. The only person that I
whoa! Can we wait a minute? As a former bureau person, can you say that one more time?
Well, the only person that I won't admit that to is my wife and kids, because they still think, and please, I hope they don't listen to the podcast because
they won't listen to it. How much you got some? I send a guy over, joy bag of donuts. Hey, look.
But then it came to, I even had once we announced the project, I even had media ask me. They said, "Oh, well, this is interesting. Are you Jewish?" And I go, "Well, no, I'm not Jewish. I'm human."
There you go.
I'm interested in this from a human standpoint, not because I'm Jewish. That would it doesn't matter. I'm interested in it, to try to prevent it. But the other question is, well, why me? Why did I get a call? Well, there is a perception. I'm going to call it a false perception right from the beginning, but a perception in the Netherlands that everybody was a collaborator. All the policemen were collaborators. They collaborated with the Nazis. And as a result, if they would have selected a retired Dutch investigator, no matter what the results would have been, they would have looked at it as, oh, of course you came up with that result because you were a Dutch policeman, and Dutch policemen were collaborators during the war. And so they recommended to the group that was trying to form this historical effort to get somebody from outside of the Dutch police, and perhaps even from outside of Europe, that could look at this and has worked cold cases before, is an experienced, tenured investigator. And my colleague over there, Hans, said, well, I know somebody that recently retired from the FBI. I know his interest in World War II, and perhaps he would be willing.
Too bad he doesn't have any investigative experience, but we're going to have to work through that. So
he's got the credentials.
Well, if we have a few detractors I'll get to later in the Netherlands.
I'll bet.
That called this an amateurish effort, and also called Rosemary Sullivan, who holds the highest tenured position in the University of Toronto, and is an accomplished writer that has run numerous awards and especially focuses on this time period of history, called her a lightweight. So, I mean, you can imagine the academic arrogance, a term I never knew until we dipped into this, that has come out of a few people in the Netherlands that have been very vocal in criticizing us coming in there and doing this, and criticizing our results, which is a theory. They feel that we don't have the option. We're not Dutch. We're not historians. So therefore, we have no voice in this.
I've seen that argument from authority before. It's like, well, you don't have the credentials, so therefore you can't possibly have an opinion on this. It's like, yeah, I can have an opinion. And by the way, a lot of times you get locked into that box. You get that very constricted view. You're in the echo chamber. But so let's talk about this. So because you mentioned a lot of things, technology is going to have to play a role in this. So how did you, what prompted you to finally say, yes, I'll do this? And by the way, you're retired. So is this all on your own time? Is there somebody helping defray at least some of the costs, or, some of the other investigative costs that go with this? What's the setup like for you to want to get involved with this, and how does that work going forward?
Well, and once again, the exact questions that I asked, how do you see this playing out? And at the time, they had no funding. But we're asking questions of me. What do you think it would take for us to set up a team? What type of resources would you need? What kind of funding? How long would it take? I estimated it would maybe take a year and a half. But even before these questions were answered, I needed to ask the questions, what was done before this? And any cold case investigation, you want to know, what were the previous investigations? Was it attempted before? What were the results? Were there any loose threads? Was there anything left hanging? What type of a job were the first two investigations?
Well, and for you, 70 years later, what kind of documents still exist?
Exactly. Yeah, and
not just the investigative reports, but what kind of historical documents exist? Did you find them, or do we still need to look for them? I mean,
and picture this: this is during a war in an occupied country that was then retaken by the Allies, and as we know, as the Nazis, as the German army were retreating, they would do as good a job as they could at burning and getting rid of evidence related to the Holocaust. They didn't do a great job of it, and there were always trails behind. And in typical Nazi fashion, there's always duplicates and quadruplicates, and they documented everything. They documented every person that got onto a train. Why? Because they were going to charge them for the transportation to the death camp. And those records still exist to this day.
Have you ever visited the Holocaust Museum here in Washington, D.C.?
On many occasions. In fact, the chief archivist, Ron Coleman, is a friend of mine, and one of the historians there, his wife, Rebecca Eberling, was one of the curators and well-known expert on the Holocaust, appeared in the recent Ken Burns films, What Did America Know About the Holocaust?
And I'll tell you, when you walk in, the smell, I still smell today, it's the smell of the shoe leather, the shoes,
That place, and for our listeners, if you ever get the opportunity and you want a moving experience, go experience that. And you probably know this, Vince, they even offer executive level, I don't want to call it a training course, but executive level sessions and I did that. I called them, we set up an appointment, and I was running the OCDEF Fusion Center at the time. I took my entire executive staff down there for half a day. And man, if you don't come out there with a tear in your eye, you are one cold-hearted son of a gun.
Do you know that's now part of the FBI curriculum at the Academy? That they go up and they actually new agents complete that course.
Fantastic.
Yeah, which is something that we're seeing at different Holocaust centers throughout the U.S. They're inviting the various law enforcement agencies in to explain to them the Holocaust, make them understand, and then sort of translate it to what we see happening today with hate groups.
And once again, we're studying history so we don't make the same mistakes again. I love it.
All right. Well, continue on, good sir. You are now, how long does it take you to make the decision that you said, I'm in?
Okay, falling back to the requests of my wife for transfer, I said, "Listen, I've been retired for a little more than a year now. Are you getting tired of me? I would love to be able to do this project." And my wife has always been my biggest supporter, and she said, "Of course, this is something you have to do." So I, after I again did some background search, I asked them, I go, "So you want a cold case? Are there any witnesses to interview?" No, they're all dead. Are there documents relating to this? Is there anything I'm going to be able to find? Well, there's never been any real evidence found, physical evidence found. Okay. And what about prior investigations? Well, there were two prior official investigations, one in 1948 and one in 1963. And that struck me odd. Man, 63 from 1945, the war was over. That's a long time. And we'll get to that later on what actually prompted that. But found out that they never really had any conclusion.
Hey players, that is the end of part 1. Part 2 comes out, as always, on Tuesday. In the meantime, go check us out at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. Also, go check out our website, gameofcrimespodcast.com. We've got a lot more information there, including our book list. Any book written by our guests will be listed there. In the meantime, go check us out also, patreon.com/Game of Crimes. It's where we put a lot more content you won't hear on our regular podcast. We go into a lot more topics, and folks, it is a lot of fun. So go check us out, patreon.com/Game of Crimes. In the meantime, everybody stay safe. We'll see you tomorrow for part 2.